y'all. Welcome to another episode of A New South is Rising podcast. I'm Sherrell Byrd, and I'm so excited you all are here today. As you can see, we're not on the porch today. However, we are in the new studios of SOWEGA Rising, and I'm so very excited to be able to have this conversation today with just a little bit about our work and especially our work around rural health. And so I'm so excited to introduce my guest today, who is a native of Springfield, Massachusetts, but she's a rural girl at heart. She has lived in Alabama, and she is now here in our community in Albany, Georgia. And so she is here today joining me to talk about the work that we're doing around rural health. Welcome, Alysia.
Thank you so much, Sherrell. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to come on and chit-chat with you for a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm so glad you've joined our team.
Can't help it.
And
I'm excited as well.
Absolutely, because every time I talk to you, you are just like so knowledgeable about rural health overall, the impact it has on Black people. As a matter of fact, you just got finished speaking, doing a whole presentation to a college or university about rural health. Tell the folks a little bit about that.
Sure thing. Like you mentioned, I'm actually a native of Springfield, Massachusetts, and that's where I'm born and raised. So I still have networks and opportunities there to talk about the work that not only that we're doing here in Southwest Georgia through SOWEGA Rising, but also rural health in general and health equity in general, particularly surrounding Black Americans and other marginalized people. So I was invited to speak at the American International College in Springfield, Massachusetts for their nursing students and their public health students. It was a great experience.
Sounds like
I talked a little bit about general health equity, how it affects marginalized people, and what their role as future medical professionals will be in making sure that equity is established, making sure that when they deal with their clients, their patients, that they're dealing with them and interacting with them from a standpoint of respect, fairness, equity, in both practice and policy.
And just really being culturally sensitive.
Very much.
Being rooted in the historic trauma that we face with the medical community.
Yes.
And we just had that conversation.
Yes, we did.
So I want to dive into that.
Let's dive.
But before we do, I got to give the rules of our show.
Okay.
Because anytime we say something shady, and we more than likely will.
It probably is going to happen.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
We take a sip of this delicious No Shade lemonade. And this is a product that's produced by a sister here in our community.
Okay.
And she started actually putting these in local grocery stores. And so we always love to support our Black-owned businesses.
Gotta do that.
So we will be taking a sip throughout. All right. So let's talk a little bit about our folks and how we feel about the medical system. And we historically, for very legit reasons, have not been okay with the medical system. And I remember during COVID-19 and how it really ravaged Albany's community. And then everyone wanted us to come and take the vaccine. And there were a lot of Black folks that were just like, absolutely not. I'm not about to put that in my body. I don't know what that is. It's too soon. We don't trust it, right? And the conversation then became like, how do we make sure we get folks to take the vaccination, but also being sensitive to the very real history that we've experienced with the medical community.
Absolutely. So
talk a little bit about, because I know you all kind of touched on that in your speech. But
I did.
Let's talk about that.
I did. I just felt like it was so important that I did not just go and talk to these medical students, these nursing students who are, generally they were juniors and seniors.
Right.
So they were towards the end of their education. Not just to talk about, this is race, this is equity, this is what equity looks like, this is how you deal with people who might look differently than you, have different cultural backgrounds.
Right.
That would be very superficial. Necessary, but superficial. I really knew that we had to go deeper. COVID brought out a lot of things, and specifically, what you were saying, vaccine hesitancy. Right. And how do we, as medical professionals, as community members and leaders, how do we deal with the medical distrust that is real? It's rooted in something. So I talked with these students and challenged them to not just say, okay, well, Black folk don't like to take vaccines. Black people distrust doctors.
Because
not to take it.
Right.
It's very demoralizing, patronizing, and disrespectful to lump and group people well, it's all Black people. No, that's not the case. So I said, well, don't just take things at face value. Mm-hmm. Dig deeper. Think critically. Ask questions. And when you see things that kind of make you pause, right, deal with it. So I had to give them a lot of education. Now, not to say they had never learned things before, but it was my responsibility to talk about, let's look at how the medical profession, since Africans arrived here on the shores, right, how has the medical profession dealt with Black people?
And not just beyond, because I know whenever they talked about COVID-19, the vaccine hesitancy,
I know
you know what I'm about to say. It was always Tuskegee.
Girl, I went to Tuskegee.
Right. And it's like that's the only thing that people want to cite when it comes to why we don't trust the medical system. But we have so many examples and legitimate reasons why these folks have been playing games with our lives for years. So talk about a few of those examples.
Sure thing. I made it very clear that because Black people were not considered fully human. Mm-hmm. When you're not considered fully human, then you're dealt with like you were a specimen. You are dealt with like you are literally a non-human being. Right. That therein lie a lack of empathy, and not just the how we interact with each other or how they interacted with Black people, but also the outright lies about basic biology. Right. It was codified in books in medical education that Black people do not feel the same levels of pain. Right. It was codified in literature and materials that Black people's brains function differently. Right. So when you have that foundation, and then obviously from enslavement moving forward, Black bodies, and I use that term very specifically, Black bodies were used medical experimentation. Black bodies were used for trial and error, for research.
But I want to make sure folks are clear that are watching.
Without consent.
And these were not just like cadavers we're talking about.
We're talking about real life people.
These were people that were alive when it happened, did not have anesthesia. And things were being, like they were literally being operated on.
Without anesthesia. Because Black people do not feel pain. Nerve endings are not the same as white people.
According to
documentation. Right. So then I had to bring it to medical history as far as James Marion Sims. Mm-hmm. He is known as the father of modern gynecology. Now, if you are a woman, which is about half the population of the United States of America and world, but here in America, if you are a woman and you have ever gone to have your gynecological exam, you've been, I don't say subjected, but the instruments that he created were used to help to inspect you. That's not the issue.
We appreciate that part.
That's not. Right? Listen, I am a child of medicine. I love it. Okay?
I'm not a fan.
We're not a fan of the process.
Very ridiculously. Okay. You can tell that God created them. You really can.
Yeah, all of that. So, but that's where the story does not end. He then decided that in his own. See, here's the thing. He, in his own words, described it. The things that he was doing to enslave Black women. That he would, in the middle of the night, get an inspiration about a medical procedure. He would go onto his property, get Black women, enslaved Black women clearly without their consent, bring them into his surgical room, and, for example, perform a C-section on a non-pregnant woman.
With no anesthesia.
No anesthesia. So the things that he perfected were perfected, if you will, at the expense of Black women who were enslaved, which is degrading, of course, as it was. But the story didn't stop there with him, because then he was like, I think he was the president of the American Medical Association. So when we talk about institutionalized or systemic racism in health, here is a man whose medical ethics were questioned all over the place. His statues from Central Park is currently in the news about, do we take them down? Right. So his medical ethics are problematic, but yet he was esteemed American and they even made a statement. Wow. So the American Medical Association. So what does that tell medical professionals, that the man who is esteemed in the medical health history has such an issue with the treatment of human beings? Right. That's just one dude. And then of course I had to talk about Henrietta Lacks. And a lot of the students, they knew what HeLa was, but they didn't necessarily know the backstory. Yeah. So here's a Black woman had a very unique form of cancer and health history, and yet her cells, because of I can't even get into all the science behind right here.
Well, she had cervical cancer.
Yes.
And her cells that they extracted from her uterus, they found were what was called like forever cells. They never die.
Amazing.
And so they use these cells to be able to create all sorts of advancements in medicine. And her cells actually have been replicated and multiplied billions of times
across the world.
So much money, like billions of dollars, have been made by pharmaceutical companies. Yes. And her family has never been paid for any of this.
They did not even know until the 70s.
Yeah. And so that, again, just further creates mistrust that they can, without your consent, take a portion of your body
and monetize it.
And they're called HeLa cells. Like
they're called HeLa cells in honor of
And thankfully, again, they've done a lot to like be able to advance medical research
across
and
the board
and all of these things, but her family is still in poverty.
Across the board.
And the story was never told until they recently wrote the book and did the movie and all of that. You know?
All of that.
Yeah.
So between that, again, talking to consent, I had to, of course, bring up the Tuskegee syphilis experiment because that's what people were talking about. But that's not, even with that, there was so much medical misinformation. Right. It's like, I heard from some people, well, they infected the men in rural Alabama, Macon County, where, again, I went to college, and that they infected them with syphilis. They did not infect them with syphilis. It's almost like it's more sinister than that, as if it could be. They had men who were already infected with syphilis and allowed their progression of the syphilis to just keep going and going.
And they thought they were being treated.
They were misguided
with placebo.
The men who were brought into the study were told that as a result of them participating in the study for bad blood, which meant a lot of things to a lot of people at the time, that they were going to be receiving free medical care. Not only did they not receive free medical care, but they're on top of that they were allowing and just monitoring the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 until death of syphilis. Even when penicillin became available, the U.S. government said, we're going to let this keep going and give them placebos, which meant you're not really getting a medicine, you're really getting sugar water.
Pills, right.
Okay, to again look at how the stages of the progression of syphilis go. These were real people
with families,
with wives
right.
whose children, unfortunately, often receive they were born with congenital syphilis,
which causes blindness,
and multiple. So it took finally. There was an acknowledgement about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. But so when moving forward to and there's of course more sterilizations.
So
we could go on and on and on.
Oh my gosh.
Really, we could go on and dealing with consent, dealing with being deceived, deception, lack of consent and other things. But moving forward to, to what we experienced with COVID, it's just not that simple to say Black people Black people have medical hesitancy about things. That's too much of an oversimplification.
Right.
So I really wanted to impress upon the students, dig deeper and ask questions, because if you're seeing trends, ask why. Because we'll tell you.
And a lot of times it's not even as big as these stories, these national stories and historical references. Sometimes in your own family, you've experienced some form of mistreatment in the medical system that's been passed down from generations. And so this is why we don't do
can't take things at face value.
Or this is why we wait until the last minute to go to a doctor and then we show up in the emergency room.
Yeah.
These are the types of issues that cause people to be hesitant about how they approach the medical community. So.